Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 302 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which is a What's Going On episode. And what's going on? Well, there's a couple of things going on. We're going to be talking about asynchronous communication. We are going to be talking about hybrid work, of course, and also we're going to be talking about the Metaverse. So I'm very interested in seeing where these conversations lead us today. And when I say we, my name is Pilar Orti. Lovely to meet you. I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant. And with me, of course, is co-host Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, listeners. Good to be back.
Yes, after the 300th episode, Mamos, never do that again, Pilar. No, it was fun. It was fun, but it was a lot of content. So I thought, Maya, if we start with this piece about new technologies that you've written, and then we'll go into asynchronous communication, and then we'll tackle the complexities of hybrid. You've got this article that you posted in the Republic of Estonia e-residency blog. Is that right? There was a blog.
Yes, it's the residency department of the Estonian government, I guess. Yes.
Yes. And the article is called Virtual e-residency, a Future in the Metaverse, and it's from 27th of April 2022. I think the best thing, rather than me trying to summarize it, can you tell us what the article is about first?
Well, I know that the category for this podcast episode is what's going on, but I feel I should immediately caveat this is more about what might be going on, what might go on one day in the future, as opposed to a statement of present technology. But there was an event in Estonia, which I didn't attend in person, because it was a hybrid event. We'll talk about hybrid later. But it was about what's starting to happen in terms of NFTs and metaverse projects and how this might start to relate to real world business and work and the way we get things done. So unusually for the e-residency blog, I was allowed to write a fairly speculative, opinion-laden post as opposed to more solidly based journalism to explore the possibilities about how things like NFTs might one day interact with the real world business use cases, which are more familiar, because this was a theme of the conference. And there was a session on merging Web3 and government issued digital identities. And this is obviously something that's very interesting to Estonia because they've led the way with the digital e-residency. Now, at the moment, that's a physical piece of card or plastic with a chip in it. There's nothing particularly Web3 about any of that. And Estonia's governance system is completely digital, but it's not decentralized. It's all effectively on a centralized database, which you interact with digitally. It's way ahead of anything other government is doing, but it's certainly not at the level that it could be. And that was what this session was exploring, what I was exploring in the article. What if we could have maybe an NFT for your digital identity and what kind of information that could include going outside the government structures and allowing you to interact digitally with many more different entities and systems, which needn't necessarily be in Estonia. They could be anywhere in the world. So, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to summarize in terms of what it's about, but it's an exploratory piece. And for me, it represents some of the possibilities which are out there in terms of the way we collaborate online, perhaps in a more decentralized fashion in the future.
And what might those ways be like? So if we're talking about collaboration, as you mentioned, that is more decentralized, what What does that mean? Any ideas?
Well, again, this is a case of what could it mean? I mean,
Hmm.
one buzzword you can't help but have come across apart from NFTs at the moment is the idea of a metaverse. And one of the things mooted at the conference, which would be very interesting to see explored technologically, is the idea of a kind of digital twin of Estonia, virtual, a virtual country, as opposed to having e-residency, digital residency in a physical country. What if we could somehow replicate Estonia and create a new home for all those e-residents in a completely virtual state? And how would we interact with that as businesses? How would that interact with everything from taxation and finance to the practical issues of collaborating and getting things done? Maybe we'll be able to test things out in that metaverse and then bring them into sort of physical world business cases once we've proved a proof of concept in the virtual space, for example. And we've had these kind of virtual spaces for a long time. But what we're starting to see now is ways of having persistent value and information exchange, which we've never had before. Obviously, one big social media company has staked their entire brand on it, because everybody's going out there trying to own the platform and own the infrastructure and be the place that people build in this virtual way. But there are so many alternatives out there at the moment. It's a little bit of a Wild West, like a lot of Web3 things, but I think it's going to be one to watch. I'm really hoping I get to write more about this in the future.
Yeah, and regarding things that we would have to deal with in the not too distant future, I think things like legislation. I mean, you were saying if you suddenly a resident of this metaverse and you're doing transactions there at some point, does that interact with your physical world tax? Does it influence your salary? Does it influence your benefits? And the other thing I'm thinking is that the word hybrid could take on a completely different meaning.
Oh, yes. Well, I think, yeah, certainly earlier in this century, we saw a lot going on in the sort of virtual reality metaverse space of you put on a headset and play a game. In fact, I was involved with some of the early testing for one of the platforms, and a lot of people just ended up literally being sick because they're immersed in this virtual world. They all wanted to do it again. It was weird. But I think a lot of the direction things are going now is a more hybrid experience, which is being described as augmented reality, where you might have, the classic example everyone gives is Pokemon Go, where you might have kind of virtual digital elements, but they're sort of transposed on top of real world things. So you could still, what that might mean in terms of the workplace is you could be having a meeting in your home office, but have your colleagues feel like they're physically present with you in three-dimensional space, just by popping on something which will probably be a lot more similar to, if anyone remembers Google Glass, or just a normal pair of spectacles rather than an immersive VR headset. So there's all sorts of exciting potential for the workplace, whether at the business structures kind of level, as you were just saying about interacting with regulatory structures, or simply collaboration. And we're already doing that collaboration really well in two dimensions. And we're starting to see kind of persistent digital spaces in the way of sort of virtual work spaces, which are very popular in 2D. Facebook and Microsoft are building them for 3D sort of spaces that you can go into in your headset. But I think the breakthrough, the killer app, is going to be once we have this kind of augmented reality experience. So you can have a colleague from another continent come and sit with you in your home office for a meeting.
Yeah. And what I'm thinking is that what this means as well is for not just the knowledge worker, but for many, many people to this openness to technology and this real flexibility in how we interact with other people, our colleagues, our clients, our customers. This is going to have to be part of our mindset, because this technology will make another huge leap at some point, and suddenly everyone will have to adapt in some way very quickly.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's what the world's biggest social network is betting on, obviously, by their rebranding and selling loss leader hardware to try and kickstart that. And actually, it probably will come from that consumer side ultimately, whether people are into Pokemon or social media. They'll get an experience of it in terms of interacting with their friends, and then they'll wonder why they can't have that at work. That's how we've ended up with so much customer service now being driven into the social media space, for example.
That's the conversation we were having episodes ago about if I can get really good connectivity at home, why can't I get really good connectivity
Yep.
at work? Or if I have all these apps on my phone, why can't I have similar apps at work? Very interesting to have been talking about stuff and suddenly seeing like a reflection, but just in another space.
Yeah, it's all coming. The future is here. It's bit by bit, it's getting there anyway.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. And listeners, if you want to get in touch with Maya and read more of her stuff, should they follow you on Twitter? Where's the place where you share most of this stuff?
Twitter and I suppose LinkedIn. Anywhere you find Maya Middlemiss, it's me. So come and say hello. Come and say hello back. It's always great to connect.
And read all these the articles, which are always interesting, and I definitely always my eyes are always opened. So let's come back to the present, but let's start looking into the future a bit as well, because if we look at the area of asynchronous communication, which we have been covering on the show, and we're not the only ones talking about it, but we all know that this non-real-time communication is what will make remote work sustainable, and it's what will give us the flexibility to work not just from wherever, but whenever we need to, and all these things. It's been quite restricted to text-based. We always talk in the podcast about the fact that you can use other mediums, not just text, for asynchronous. We have asynchronous video, audio, but everything's a little bit clunky at the moment. So I thought that, actually, I was talking to Mark Kilby for the conversation for the 300th episode, and something that didn't make it into those episodes, but that has made it into our new series of conversations, which I will come to in a second. He was talking about a book club that he's organized online, but an asynchronous book club, and where people are mostly encouraged to communicate via video. Have you been in anything like this, Maya?
I haven't, but I love the sound of it. I think the reason I struggle with video sometimes is you've got to be somewhere that you can engage with it in real time, and you've got to be somewhere you can put your sound on and so on. So sometimes if it's more fun and sociable, I want to catch up a bit more casually than that. But I love the idea of getting together and sharing videos to talk about books, because that might be the thing that, rather than it being a work thing, to do it via the route of something fun, like a book club. So yeah, intriguing.
Yeah. So let's bring Mark in just for a couple of minutes to tell us about his experience. Can you describe how you set up the book club, the technology you used, and how it's gone?
So I have a really strong aversion to hype. And there's a lot of hype around hybrid and even more hype around asynchronous. And even I had some doubts around how asynchronous would work for me personally. So I thought, you know what? The only way to prove or disprove this for me is to do it. And that was one of the main reasons. The other reason was with talks I've done and also people who've contacted me through my newsletter, they asked me, would you ever do a book club? Well, when you have distributed, interested people around the world, it's hard to find one time on the calendar that works for everyone. So I thought, okay, can we do a calendarless book club? And so I looked at how can we capture information that we're all getting out of the conversations, and where can we have the conversations and connections? So I actually picked two tools for that. One was P2,
Oh, wow.
which is essentially a variation of WordPress. Yeah. So P2 became our information gathering site. So any information, even if it was discussed in the other tool, which I'll get to, we wrote down our thoughts in P2. And I shared some mini blog posts there as people asked me questions, and I thought, this requires a longer response, needs some graphics. So let me put some posts out there, and I'll probably eventually release those on my newsletter. But it was fascinating to watch how people were bringing real life scenarios and said, oh yeah, I said this is kind of addressed in the book, but let me expand upon it here. So I enjoyed that part of it, and they seem to also. But the other key part is, and you and I talked about this before, is the connection.
Mm.
So I've been on Slack, I've been on Microsoft Teams. I think I have been on almost every chat
You
platform on the
have.
planet. And you get to a point where you feel like you're just merely talking to icons. And you wonder, is it really people I'm talking to? And so I look for different solutions, and I also track a lot of new technology. And I came across this one called Volley. And the best way to describe Volley is if if Slack and Zoom got together and had a kid, it would be Volley. So that it's the easiest way to describe it. So it is a video chat application. So you're sending video messages. You can't send text. You can't send audio. And I appreciate some of the messages you left there.
Mm.
Uh, Video is the primary means of communicating, and they're looking at how can you reduce or eliminate meetings using technology like this. So it's kind of in an extended beta right now. I've been experimenting with actually a couple different things, but the book club is the main experiment. So the first week and a half, we just kind of got used to the tools. I started talking about the tools in both P2 and Volley, so they, no matter where they started, they would hear the same conversations or they would read the same conversations. They get to meet each other, but they all eventually gravitated into Volley to start talking about what they were interested in. Because I asked them, I said, "What brought you here?" And I know it's the book, but what in particular? So getting to share a little bit about why they were there with each other. And I also let them know you're going to see my house, my family in the background. Don't feel like you have to, but I said, do please, if you can, please use video because we get to see who you are. And that's important for conversation. And so while some were reluctant, they all did turn on a video. And what was amazing was what happened over the period of time. One of the individuals that was in the book club um, lives in Moscow. And so the book club started before the Ukrainian conflict, and he shared some of his concerns
Mm.
in the tool, and it was amazing how the rest of the group kind of rallied around him, listened, and really helped him in some ways to look at what can he do for himself and his family. He's actually considering moving out of the country because of what's happened. And that was something that was totally unexpected. Uh, but it was a pleasant surprise. So that told me, okay, it is possible to build connection this way.
What has your experience been, or and some of the feedback you've got of being a community and gathering around in that space?
I've heard similar feedback because some have had to step out for a week or two from the book club and come back, and they felt that FOMO, that fear of missing out, and they wanted to go listen to all the videos. But I find the same experience with chat.
Mhm.
And I think you and I are both members of a few Slack communities. I'm probably in way too many. I keep flushing the
Yes.
the number of Slack communities. And after a while, you can only scan so much. So I think there is probably, well, actually, I know there's more technology coming that might help with that. So I think Otter.ai announced a few days ago how with their transcription technology, they now provide summaries, and there's different types of summaries. So I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of technology shows up a few different ways. What if you take a 2 week vacation and you point a bot to whether it's Slack or a Volley chat system, say, okay, give me a summary of what happened.
Mm.
I think that's fairly close to happening.
Wow. Well, I certainly thought that was interesting. And actually, Mark is playing with another bit of high-tech asynchronous communication as part of his work. He's being involved in that. So you can listen to the whole conversation with him over our new show, which is called Work-Life Changes and Remote Work in Organizations. And you can find it at the moment only in the larger podcast players. But we also have a page at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts/work-life changes altogether. And you can hear Mark talking about this, but also a little bit more and what he talked about in the 300th episode. But Maya, I thought that it surprised me, and I think it's I interacted with it. He invited me onto the book club, and for me, what was most difficult was to switch on the camera because a little bit, I mean, it's interesting that before Mark's piece, you were saying about interacting with what's there already, how it needs just a little bit more, maybe comfort or preparation, whatever. But for me is the fact that when I'm writing, I can write from anywhere. But if I want to switch on the camera and record for posterity, let's face it, just takes me a little bit longer, let's say.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's, in fact, even more so than audio, which you and I've got to the point of being pretty spontaneous about. We'll record a podcast without
Yes.
hopefully overthinking it too much, but it is different. And I think there's also something that I've come across when I've tried to train myself to use dictation software. Actually, the way that you think and form thoughts in writing versus saying them out loud, whether the video's on or off, even the fact that it's recording your words. I think it's a very different thought process. And I suppose I've never got very far with dictation software because I need to, if it's sort of ideas and opinions that I'm going to write about, I need to do it through my fingers. And I think it might be a similar kind of inhibition that you kind of feel you've got to have your thoughts perfectly formed, or maybe it just means I often start typing a sentence with no idea where it's actually going to end up. But that's probably not a good thing for a writer to confess. But I also think, because I've been working on another podcast where we're capturing video, it's important to remember that even after all these years of our working from home and things like that, that there is still a degree of discomfort with it for a lot of people. And I think, as you said, the extra dimension of having it recorded and people can come back to it at leisure, it just kind of raises the stakes. I've had people who've said, I'm interested in your new podcast, but could we just do audio? Not very comfy having it recorded as a video. So I think it's important we remember that. It will be quite a self-selecting group, obviously. And in the world that Mark Kilby's working in, I'm sure it won't be a big deal. And anything that actually helps to raise that comfort level, I think, is a good thing.
And when we're looking at diversity in communication styles and how we like to communicate, it's really interesting because we've gone from, okay, there's a lot of real-time communication. Therefore, those of us who actually discover what we think when we start hitting a sentence and where we're comfortable expressing ourselves like that, we've moved into that a bit. Okay, great. And now the technology is actually evolving so that people who are not comfortable with that, but actually just prefer to go,
Yeah.
and whether the camera is on or not, they're not even going to notice. In fact, maybe the camera, because it simulates the presence of someone, albeit later, that might stimulate them to think.
Yeah.
So I love that it's just adding to that diversity. Well, I don't know if I love it because it gets complicated, but it's great.
It is. It's adding richness, I think, and adding choices and reminding us that we do have choices. You know, that it's not a case of, oh, if we're going to be asynchronous, we've got to keep writing notes to each other all the time. I think anything that helps us snap out of that as this alternative, it can be much richer and much more engaging, and really reflect the needs of how people want to consume that content as well. Because even in a book club, I'm sure there are people who don't want to read.
Yes, and it's different to have to sit and type or whatever than just switch on the camera and go. And the other thing is, of course, that when we're talking about communication, there is not one way of communicating. There is not one thing we communicate about as well. So this is asking us to think, well, if we're going to be talking about X, yeah, okay, we want to do it asynchronously, but asynchronously, how? What is the best way? What we had a whole episode on team rhythm. What is going to help our team to make that conversation more part of our workflow and not something that either has to speed it up or has to slow it down? Yeah, I love I mean, we love talking about this, and teams might not enjoy talking about it as much, but actually it's something that we need to reflect on, think about, and then choose accordingly. Right. So from that, let's move on to another kind of asynchronous communication, which has been around for ages, and this is the use of emojis. I mean, this is also, of course, part of real-time communication, depending on how we're using it. And again, Maya, you and I had a whole half of a What's Going On episode dedicated to the use of emojis. And when you start to think about their use, it actually gets quite interesting, and all the different cultures, all the different even ages, generations, what different things mean to different people. And Ross Winter, who, by the way, probably loved your stuff on the metaverse because he was talking about that in the episode 300. Ross actually had something to say about the use of emojis. So I thought that rather than keep it for the 300th episode, which is why he sent that bit, I asked him if we could include it today as a reply to our conversation on emojis. And here's what he said.
Why do we only have a handful of emojis? Should we ditch emojis? Are they harming our quality of communication and connection? I mean, I love using emojis within text because I think something that lacks in text is tone. So to add emojis in there can communicate tone. But I think, why are we flicking thumbs up on things, in such a rushed kind of manner? I think, what are we achieving by doing that? So I think we should ask questions like that. And I'm not just talking about Facebook, I'm talking about, like LinkedIn and stuff like that. I guess I'd like to hear other people's opinions and explore the idea, or like ask the questions, why are we sticking thumbs up on things? I think it's more valuable to comment, to sort of impart a feeling or knowledge or something useful.
That also gave me plenty to think about, Maya, especially this concept of, are actually emojis, as much as we like them to enrich our communication, are they going to make it worse?
Well, I think, yeah, there's a danger of everything new triggering that reaction, isn't it? And I don't know, I feel if I'm consciously trying not to be that person who has a slightly sort of backlash reaction to anything new, that will make me feel like I'm getting old. So whilst I might wish that my own daughters maybe communicated with some actual letters and words occasionally, instead of trying to decode what this one slightly weird face that I don't know what that means. But hopefully these things add depth rather than taking it away in the end.
For me, it brings up a wider conversation, something that I have been a bit concerned about for a while. And I mean, I like emojis as reactions, which is also what the context that Ross was talking about. I love them as reactions. It does, however, bring the question of, well, should I be writing a smiley face, or should I also be saying, I love that because?
Yeah.
But that's one question. But the other is how the platforms that we're using, and we're seeing how they're evolving so much, the features that they're bringing in can start to drive how we communicate without us even thinking about it twice. And by that, what I mean is, well, stuff that's been around for ages, which is the predictive sentences when you're typing an email, for example. Which for me, I've switched those off. I don't want anyone. I want to be writing what I want to write in my style. And then, of course, things like Ross was referring to LinkedIn. On LinkedIn now, when you get a private message, you have all these replies to choose from.
Yeah, that's really weird. Thanks for connecting.
Yes.
I don't want to say that. Or maybe I would want to say that, but then they'll think there was an automatic. Oh, I hate it too.
Yeah, and and it does worry me, because it does mean that we could. I mean, this is, of course, yeah, this is all hypothesis, and I'd love to hear someone who's got, if anyone has any data on any of this or knows of any research being done, please let us know. Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com or virtualnotdistant.com on the contact form, which is that it could make us more flippant about our conversation, because if someone says something and I get all these canned replies that I can just hit a button, well, that is one less seconds that I'm thinking about this person. It's less time that I'm thinking about how to engage with that person. And I'm thinking that for all the conversations around making work more human and the opportunities that technology can give us for that, actually, I have my fear is that it starts to dehumanize it without us even noticing it in the name of speed and productivity.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because there's the alternative either to have a more considered response and take your time to reply, or in some cases, is it to just pass it by and not bother? In which case, surely it's better to give the smiley reaction than not engage at all. So, yeah, it's giving us another in between place, I guess, and we just need to make sure it doesn't start to dominate and displace the more considered discourse that hopefully still exists in both business and personal communications somewhere.
And I imagine self-awareness is key then.
Yes, what do we actually want? People know how easy and quick it is just to click, especially like if you're reacting and somebody's already done that reaction and you just click on it to +1 it. It's literally less than a second, and certainly less than a second's thought. So I think people are going to attach different value to those kinds of communications versus something a bit more thoughtful.
Yeah. Loads to think about. I mean, this could be the whole What's Going On episode. We could continue with this conversation, but let's move on because we have our third topic. Well, and then we've got lots of community news also as well. And actually, we do have a fourth item, just something that I came across that would like to share with listeners to make their teamwork or even their online friendships to give them something else they can do to connect with each other online. But let's look at the whole hybrid conversation, because even though, I mean, it's going on and on, I think it's starting to settle. And just to let listeners know that I was recording only yesterday with David, who's a listener, and he is going to be sharing how his organization is moving onto a hybrid space, and he's going to share from why, when they started to think about it, how they consulted with people. There was a lot of consultation. I was so delighted to hear that. And then some of the things they're implementing and some of the choices, very deliberate choices that they've made. So this is for me, it's interesting that something which was, okay, we might be doing this, and then we start to hear what the big companies are doing. And now actually we're starting to hear what the thoughtful processes are from some organizations. And I don't think he mentioned even like a number of days in office. That was just not even mentioned. So hopefully we can move. But this is, I mean, so of course we'll have a look at hybrid and the research that is going on around it. And this was I don't know, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but it's just so much in this piece. The first thing that I wanted to raise actually is that the conversation between, we can start to separate the conversation between hybrid events and hybrid meetings and hybrid teamwork and hybrid organizations in this space, because I still think that everything is being mixed. And sometimes when we're talking about a hybrid way of working, what someone means is that we have hybrid meetings, when actually there's a lot of other stuff around it. Is this something you're noticing, Maya, or is this something that I'm picking up?
No, I think you're absolutely right, because the danger is if we don't distinguish it, like the John Hopkins research in the article, we can say that the majority of people are doing hybrid work, because when you group all the different possible meanings of that word together, it covers nearly everything. If you just have one meeting with some people in an office and some not, that's your hybrid working, whereas that might not really reflect your organization's preferred approach to work. It might be just the way you have certain conversations. So I think we really do need to dig into these nuances a bit. It's a year ago, maybe, when people were starting to talk about the end of lockdown, they could say, yeah, we're probably going to be doing hybrid. And that was enough to sort of say we've answered that question. And I think what the actual reality is proving is that that's nowhere near the end of the conversation. That needs to be so much more nuanced and so much more iterative. And you just need to see what works for different kinds of activities and collaborations and spaces within your team. And it's great that you're talking to people who are doing that and really taking the time now that they've got the time, because obviously they didn't have it during the pandemic. So this needs to be the moment, I think, that people need to stop, pause a little bit, and maybe think, what do we actually want? Yes, it's going to be hybrid. We understand that, but what does that really look like? And what can we trial and see how how that actually pans out for people. And as this article makes clear, it all comes down to flexibility in the end.
Mm-hmm. So the article that Maya is referring to is by John Hopkins and Anne Bardul. I imagine that's how you say it, her name. And John put a link on this during a conversation on LinkedIn, where we're actually commenting on an article that was about the emotional load of hybrid work and how difficult some people were finding it. But John's article, it's in The Conversation, and it was published on the 3rd of April, 2022. And it's the first national study of working arrangements in Australia since government work from home directions were lifted. So I love that it's Australia, because I don't usually hear a lot from that side of the world, if it's not from Tim and Bree. And the headline is "Flexibility Makes Us Happier," with 3 clear trends emerging in post-pandemic hybrid work. So listeners, I encourage you to have a look at the article, well worth looking at it. And I'm just scrolling down trying to find the 3. Here we go. So, but what I thought would be interesting would just be to name the 3 main types of home and office arrangements. I think even this is important, that it's home and office. We've got the whole co-working and other things doesn't seem to be part of the survey. So we've got 3 things I'm just going to quote, so I don't fluff any of them. We've got 1, days in office fixed, with workers expected to attend the office for a specific number of set days, for example, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and this applied to 29% of hybrid workers. Fixed office frequency, but workers have the flexibility to choose which days, for example, 3 days a week, any 3. And this applied to 24.3% of hybrid workers. And finally, the flexibility to choose where they work and when. And this was the case for 28.5% of hybrid workers. And I think, like, as you were saying, it is obvious that it's the flexibility that is making people happy, not just the location. And it's the flexibility means you're giving people autonomy. And we know that is associated, well, with intrinsic motivation, but also with happiness.
Yes. And it's interesting that those trends have emerged as almost equal at the moment in terms of uptake, which shows that people are trying out different things. But that little word hybrid obviously describes all 3 of those, and they're so different in terms of what they expect from people and how much autonomy and flexibility people really have over their day-to-day. It's a huge spectrum. If you're told that Thursdays is one of your office days, come what may, then there's very little flexibility in that at all, whereas the ability to choose gives a huge amount of autonomy and discretion and trust to the worker. So completely different experiences.
And what would be really interesting is also to understand the premises, because of course we talk a lot about whether we're coming into the office or not, but what office are we coming into? So some organizations might say, well, you can only come in Mondays and Tuesdays because actually what we've had to do in order to, for whatever reason, we've had to scale down on office space. So you can only come in on Mondays and Tuesdays. If we don't give you the fixed days,
Yeah.
we don't know what's going to happen, and all these things. But I think that sometimes the importance of that level of detail for people who are just having to follow instructions, that level of detail might be what we need for people to really understand what is going on and not feel like things are being imposed for no reason.
Yes, and to think about why we're doing hybrid in the first place. Is it because people like working from home, or is it because we have an overcrowding issue in the office, or is it because we want to give people flexibility? I'm not sure that question's always been addressed at the organizational level. When people say, yeah, we're going back with hybrid, then there might be people left within that organization saying, well, why? What's the driver behind that? And that will hopefully inform the right actual work model.
Yeah. So that we love the article because it brings up all these questions, and it's really stating the variations and also the importance of flexibility making some of these decisions. So what I love about the What's Going On episodes, Maya, is that sometimes I get to rant. And there were a couple of articles. It was while I was on holiday, so I actually deliberately didn't pay any attention to them. But one of our listeners got in touch and he said, Pilar, what do you think of this? I thought, okay, we'll comment. And it really is about this statement that one of the British ministers made, that actually all civil servants had to go back to the office. This was a moment everyone had to go back to the office. And when you look at, and we'll stick the link in the show notes, when you look at one of the reasons when you look at the reasons, they're not research based. And one of the reasons was, and I can't believe we were hearing this, was that the taxpayer was paying for all these office buildings. So we needed to come in and use them.
Just where do you even start to unpick that? Facepalm emoji.
Yes. And many years ago, I was talking to someone in local authority saying, actually, look, we're looking at how to reduce the office space. So how can we incorporate remote work into what we're doing? A few months ago, someone in my pocket psych, a researcher, was also talking about someone in senior leadership, again in a local authority, saying, can we ask more people to work from home so we can reduce the office space? And then you have this person saying, hey, we've got all these flashy offices, we've got to use it, come in. But it didn't stop there.
No, I mean, we agreed that we weren't going to swear, didn't we? So
yes, please.
No, we're not. But we were discussing this quite a lot on the Healthy Happy Homeworking Facebook group, where there is no such restraint, and what things might be most likely to put you off ever wanting to go back to an office, including these funny little notes that this particular minister has been leaving for people about really sort of this little passive aggressive, you're not at your desk and I expect to see you there. Just everything wrong.
Yes. And I find it interesting because while some people, while most people are unlikely to be doing stuff like this, because really, honestly, who does? There might be things that some senior leaders are doing to either encourage one or the other, or in between, that they're not aware of actually can backfire. And you can hear, look, we want you back in the office because we miss you, or because we think this is the place where strong social bonds are made, for whatever reason. But I think that the way in which that is expressed, it's anyway. So what happened, listeners, was this article from BBC says Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg has been criticised for leaving a note for civil servants saying, "Sorry, you were out when I visited." The note, printed on government paper with Mr. Rees-Mogg's title, was left at empty desks and read, "I look forward to seeing you in the office very soon." Mr. Rees-Mogg has said all civil servants must stop working from home. So,
is this the level of debate we're having?
Yes.
In probably the most senior and important office in the country. And, just this week we had the Prime Minister saying that when he works from home, he gets distracted and wanders around eating cheese or something like that.
Yes,
you just want to kind of beat your head against a wall that there are workplaces doing such interesting and innovative things to really redefine the way that people collaborate and communicate and cooperate together and come out of this crisis stronger. And then at the top government leadership of the country, we've got passive aggressive little notes, and it's quite hard to get your head around the dichotomy there sometimes.
So I had a short exchange with the listener, and I just wanted to share his thoughts because I thought he actually can give us some insight that I don't have. So he's saying, well, he quotes, Mr. Rees-Mogg said he planned to continue visiting departments with lower attendance figures to ensure we are making efficient use of the central London estate. And the listener says, wouldn't it make more sense to reduce the amount of office space rather than fill it with people that don't want to be there? And then the listener says, I also think that some departments really struggled during the pandemic. DVLA couldn't carry out driving tests initially, so they became very backlogged and still are. The passport office was still reliant upon handling paper documents, such as birth certificates and foreign passports, for some application. This meant home working wasn't possible for all staff, and for those that had to go to the office, it was at reduced capacity to meet social distancing guidelines. Indeed, the passport office are now advising people to allow 10 weeks for their applications still today, whereas pre-pandemic it was 3 weeks. Perhaps ministers are assuming if some roles in some departments could be done remotely, that must be the same for all roles in all departments. I agree with your point about value for money too. Reducing the amount of office space used by government goes hand in hand with increasing the amount of remote working. It feels like this message has been forgotten somewhere. And then he says he looks forward to listening to the show. And so thank you very much. And listeners would love to hear stuff like this, especially because it really goes to show it's not, you can say everyone needs to come back or everyone needs to work from home. And in large organizations like a home, like a ministry or like the civil service, don't you need to look at what people are doing and then help them make the decisions that are going to help them do their best work?
Yeah, and look at what's the real problem. Is it that we've got too much expensive real estate? Well, that's really simple, actually. You cut that back. Is the problem that we're too reliant on paper handling? Well, then you need more digital transformation. And the public sector is often lagging behind on that. But there are so many lessons coming out of the pandemic. And the lesson isn't try to go back to how things were before. There are often much better solutions that could stop this kind of problem arising in the future.
Yeah. And some departments in government in the UK were so ahead with digitalization, taking stuff online and stuff like that. And it really feels like, and the digital services, I mean, so much amazing stuff, but it really feels like, well, maybe departments do talk to each other, but maybe ministers don't. I don't know.
They just leave each other notes, apparently.
All right. So I think we can close the what's going on section before moving on to onto the community with something I heard in the After Hours podcast, which is a show I really, really like and recommend. And at the end of that show, they recommend stuff. So sometimes it's food, sometimes it's a film. And they were recommending this way of doing puzzles online with other people. And this is something I didn't know existed, and it's opened up a whole new world again. And Google Arts and Culture, which I didn't even know was a thing. So Google Arts and Culture has a puzzle, and you can just go. You can hit the link. It's if you Google Arts and Culture Google Puzzle Party, it will get you there. But we'll stick the link in the show notes as well. And it's why not? If you're looking for stuff to do with your team, I think this could be really, really a fun thing to be doing.
Oh, that's good. It's nice. I didn't know Google had an arts and culture service as well, but there you go. They've got everything else. And I think it's been, I tell you what, I blame Wordle actually for putting puzzling sort of back into the cultural conversation right now. I think that's probably just the time is right for team puzzles. I think that could be a very successful thing to investigate.
Excellent. Great. Good. Well, let's move on to our bit around community. Well, the first thing I would like to share with listeners is that you are hosting a new show. Maya, the future is freelance.
Yay! Yes, I hope so. This is it's a brand new podcast. We've got 5 episodes live now, but it only really launched last week. And I'm doing it in collaboration with my Estonian business service providers, who are called Zolo with an X. And they wanted to create more content to both to support their network of freelancers, but also to just kind of create a little bit more of a sense of community. So it's a fantastic new project to be working on, because obviously I believe the future is freelance. They believe the future is freelance because they've hired a freelancer to be the voice of their brand, which is an incredible privilege. And it means I get to talk to some amazing people about just that. So yeah, please do give it a listen. It's up on all the main players now. And if you've got a brilliant freelancing story to share, then please get in touch. We really want to try and support the freelance community and help people professionalize their journey and find new ways of living and working that works for them. So I do hope you'll have a listen and let me know what you think.
Excellent. And listeners, that is already out in all the podcast platforms. So you can look for, is it Future is Freelance or The Future is Freelance?
I think the listing is Future is Freelance.
Great.
Or it might be the gosh, I should know, shouldn't I?
Put Maya middle miss.
Yeah.
That's how I found it. So the future is freelance. Excellent. And talking of podcasts, just to thank everyone who listened to the 3 parts of episode 300, or even if you listen to half of one part, I'm delighted. And thanks to everyone who left us some notes and comments. And especially I wanted to thank my friend Zara, who I'm still connected to on LinkedIn. And Zara and I we shared a room, we shared a flat when we were at Imperial, and she's now back in Pakistan. She's incredibly top scientists there. I think, I don't know, she leads a university, I think, or at least a department. And I was so touched because from someone who is not part of my bubble, who it's not part of my world, let's face it, and who is in a different industry, in a different part of the world, for her to say, your work is so topical and globally relevant, I was blown away.
Yeah, that's lovely. It's so nice to hear from people and know that we've connected, and the relevance is the key. So it's lovely to get feedback on that.
Yeah. And then I wanted also to a shout out to Hans Gardner, who's a management consultant and coach, who's also around on LinkedIn. And he shared the episode with Laurel Farr, which was 298, I think. And I loved it. I know why it was. He shared her article. And then I said, hey, you know the article, you can hear Laurel. And then he shared that too. And he said, I very much agree with the statement that in 5 years, we won't be talking about virtual or hybrid work. We'll just be talking about work and how we design work and collaboration. So moving away from where to how. So in fact, I'm going to carry on reading because it's very interesting what he had to say. But I think that is so right. I mean, I'm going to steal that. We've got to move away from where to how. And also important is the view that many organizations are now at a crossroads between the attitude that in-person work, and thus back to the office, represents the more valuable work, and the view that productivity and satisfaction depend on how you manage the work and not from where. Those who take the latter path, however, face an extensive change program, toolset, skill set, mindset, and they will have to invest quite heavily in equipment for hybrid settings on site, for employee home office equipment, and for skills development. I'm not sure how many organizations are ready for that at this time. Isn't that an amazing summary?
Yes, that really sums it up. And for anybody who hasn't read the original article or heard the podcast with Laurel Farrer, actually, I strongly recommend you do that, because it was very much that kind of taking that strategic look, which Hans has followed up with people have really got to step back and think, how are we going to do this? What do we want it to look like? And then figure out the route to get there. Because if you try to reverse engineer that afterwards, it's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah. And then finally, from two veterans of the online space, we've got one recommendation for an app from Nancy Settle Murphy. And she said, I shared something because in Adventures in Podcasting, one of my guests sent me a headshot with a transparent background. No, it wasn't transparent. She'd actually cut off, so you could put it in anywhere. And I thought, oh, that's a really good idea, because I never do that. I always send my profile picture with my background. And then what usually happens, people have to crop it to fit it into their artwork. So I shared this online, and Nancy said, this is a free app that lets you remove backgrounds and make slight edits if needed, super easy to use, and it's remove.bg. So I just thought, you never know what listener might be interested in. And then finally, and this is, I am so embarrassed to say this, that back in March, when I was interviewing Penny Pullen for Facilitation Stories podcast, I also recorded a little bit with her to tell us about how listeners could get a discount from her second edition of her book, Virtual Leadership. And I can't say I forgot. I didn't find the right moment to put it in. So listeners, you can get 10% discount on Penny's book, Virtual Leadership, Practical Strategies for Success with Remote or Hybrid Work and Teams, with our code FBM20. So 10% discount if you buy the book directly from koganpage.com. So I highly recommend it. She's just updated it to cover the new, she already covered hybrid meetings in the book, but to really cover this new, this wider adoption, I think, of hybrid work. So really, really recommend it. So the discount code again is FBM20. So Maya, man, we've covered a lot. There's a lot going on now.
We keep saying, is there anything new happening? Is there, can we still talk about hybrid? Because that's, and of course, stuff keeps going on. I still feel like we're at a really shifting, pivotal time in the future of work and the way that we're collaborating is unfolding. And yeah, I think we'll still have things to say even next month.
Well, listeners, we hope you will join us next month. We hope you will continue to listen to all the episodes we have. If you're a new listener, we've got loads of episodes to listen to. And also remember, listeners, if you enjoyed episode 300 and want to hear more from those guests, you can look for work-life changes and remote work in organizations, or follow the link that we'll put in the show notes. And there'll be, by the end of May, there will be 9 interviews for you to listen to, all between 15 minutes and 30 minutes. So more condensed than our usual episodes. Meanwhile, don't forget to subscribe to this show, 21st Century Work Life, on whatever podcast app you use. And if you go over to our website, virtualnotdistant.com, you can sign up to our newsletter, which has monthly reading and listening recommendations. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow us on Twitter. We are at Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O. And finally, if you want to send feedback by good old-fashioned email, you can use my address, which is pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. Listeners, we know there's loads of shows out there covering some of what we cover, but we are so happy that you are here with us. Thank you for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.